She married a broke war veteran in a wheelchair, but the FBI just showed up asking about $12 million she's never seen. Would you still marry him if he was broken, and in a wheelchair? That's what Zariah's aunt whispered 3 months ago as they watched Clayton wheel himself under the magnolia tree at their backyard wedding. The whole town of Meridian, Mississippi, thought she'd lost her mind. Have you ever loved someone your family warned you about? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. A 23-year-old church girl marrying some white stranger from Montana she'd met online. But Zariah didn't care what they thought. She saw something in Clayton Reed that nobody else could see. Kindness. Honesty. A man who made her laugh even through his pain. Someone they said would only bring you down. Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever had to defend your choice to love someone everyone else doubted. Now, staring at the two FBI agents standing in her tiny cabin kitchen, Zariah wondered if maybe her family had been right all along. The problem wasn't that she'd married a broken man. The problem was discovering that everything about him might be a lie. What happens when the person you trusted most becomes a stranger? Stick around because this story is about to get crazy. The agent with the gray suit placed a manila folder on their scratched wooden table. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer records, and photos that made Zariah's stomach drop. $12 million. All traced back to accounts bearing her new married name. Mrs. Clayton Reed. Money she'd never seen, never touched, never even dreamed of having. But let me take you back to where this all started. 3 months earlier, in the stifling heat of a Mississippi August, the magnolia tree cast shadows across their backyard wedding, where folding chairs borrowed from First Baptist sat crooked on the uneven ground. Zariah had sewn her own dress from fabric she'd found marked down at the Walmart in Jackson. White cotton with tiny pearl buttons that had taken her weeks to afford. Her grandmother would have been proud. God rest her soul. Clayton's wheelchair gleamed silver against the faded white of her dress. He'd driven 12 hours from Montana just to marry her, pulling that old Honda Civic with the hand controls behind a moving truck that carried everything he owned, which wasn't much. A few boxes of clothes, some military medals he kept in a shoebox, and medical equipment that reminded everyone what war had cost him. The preacher kept it short. Clayton couldn't stand for the vows, so Zariah knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers while her cousin played guitar. His hands were strong, callous from working on cars and fixing things around his cabin. Honest hands, she'd thought. Hands that told the truth about a life of hard work and harder losses. I, Clayton, take you, Zariah, to be my wife. Through poverty and sickness, through the good days and the days when I can barely get out of bed. I promise to love you exactly as you are and never ask you to be anything different. She cried during those vows, not just because they were beautiful, but because no man had ever promised to love her exactly as she was. In Meridian, there was always something you needed to change, something you needed to be better at, some way you weren't quite enough for the good Christian boys at church. But Clayton saw her. Really saw her, the way she hummed gospel songs while doing dishes, how she could stretch a $20 grocery budget into meals for a week, the fact that she'd never been with a man, never even been kissed until him, and wasn't ashamed of waiting, in a world that made her feel behind or weird for saving herself. He made her feel precious. Their wedding night had been gentle. Nervous laughter and whispered reassurances in the tiny bedroom of his Montana cabin. He'd been patient with her inexperience, tender with her fear, careful with her trust. His disability hadn't mattered in those moments. What mattered was how he looked at her, like she was something miraculous, something worth waiting for. You're beautiful, Zariah, he'd whispered against her neck as she learned the weight of his body, the warmth of skin against skin, the way love could feel both overwhelming and perfectly safe. So beautiful. She believed him. God help her. She believed every word. For 3 months, they'd lived simply. Clayton worked on cars from their one-car garage, cash jobs that kept food on the table and the lights on. Zariah cleaned houses for the few wealthy families scattered around Butte County. They went to church on Sundays at the little Methodist place down the road, where the congregation was 12 people on a good day and nobody asked too many questions about the black girl and the white veteran who kept to themselves. It wasn't the life she dreamed of as a little girl, but it was honest, clean, built on love instead of expectations. Or so she'd thought. The FBI agent cleared his throat, pulling Zariah back to the present. Back to the kitchen where her coffee had gone cold and her world was about to explode. "Mrs. Reed," Agent Patterson said, his voice flat and professional, "we need to discuss your husband's financial activities. Specifically, the $12 million that's been transferred into accounts bearing your name over the past 6 months." Zariah looked at Clayton, waiting for him to laugh, to explain, to tell these men they had the wrong people. But his face had gone pale, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair like he was about to run. "I don't know anything about $12 million, Zariah said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to sound. "Clayton, tell them. Tell them they made a mistake." Clayton opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes found hers across the small kitchen. And for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something that chilled her to the bone. Guilt. The second agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a softer voice, leaned forward. "Mrs. Reed, are you familiar with Red Cloud Holdings? Barron Industries? Any tech companies based out of Seattle?" "No, Fadia whispered. Should I be?" The agents exchanged glances. Agent Patterson opened another folder, this one filled with photographs. Clayton in a business suit, standing next to people Zariah recognized from magazine covers and news shows. Clayton walking, not in a wheelchair, but walking on his own, 2 legs across what looked like a corporate boardroom. Zariah's hands started shaking. "Clayton Reed isn't your husband's real name," the female agent said gently. "His name is Clayton Barron. He's the heir to a technology fortune worth approximately $1.2 billion. And Mrs. Reed, we have reason to believe you're either his accomplice or his victim." The room went dead silent, except for the tick of the wall clock Zariah had bought at a yard sale. Clayton still hadn't spoken, hadn't denied it, hadn't looked surprised. Finally, Zariah found her voice. "Clayton, is this true?" He took a breath that seemed to cost him everything. When he looked up, the man she'd married was gone, replaced by a stranger whose eyes held secrets she couldn't begin to imagine. "Everything I told you about who I am was a lie," he said quietly. "But everything I told you about how I feel. 3 months of marriage, and she's just learning his real last name isn't Barron." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just getting started. "Everything I told you about who I am was a lie." Zariah felt something crack inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with her heart and everything to do with her faith in the world making sense. "Get out," she whispered. The FBI agents looked between them. "Mrs. Reed, we really need to—" "Not you." Zariah's eyes never left Clayton's face. "Him. Get out of my house." "Zariah, please let me explain." "Explain what?" The words came out louder than she intended, echoing off the thin cabin walls. "Explain how you can walk? Explain how you're some kind of millionaire playing poor? Explain how there's $12 million in my name that I've never seen." Clayton's hands trembled as he reached for her. She stepped back like he was on fire. "The wheelchair is real," he said, his voice cracking. "The injury, the pain, all of that is real. I can walk short distances, but not like I used to. The doctor said I might regain some function, and over the past year." "So you've been lying about being disabled too?" Zariah felt sick. "No. God, no, Zariah. I'm not faking anything. I got better. Slowly. And I didn't know how to tell you without explaining everything else." Agent Patterson cleared his throat. "Mr. Barron, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. Mrs. Reed, you're not under arrest, but we strongly suggest you retain legal counsel." "Wait." Zariah held up a hand, her mind racing. "If he's rich, why do we live like this? Why did I clean toilets while he supposedly has billions?" Clayton's face crumpled. "Because I needed to know. I needed to know if someone could love me for who I am, not what I have. Every woman I'd ever dated, every relationship, it was all about the money, the status, the things I could buy them. So you decided to lie to me instead? I decided to test you." The words hit Zariah like a slap. Test her like she was some kind of experiment? Like her love was something that needed proving? Have you ever been in love with someone who was testing you the whole time? Someone who made you prove your worth without telling you there was a test? Comment below if you've ever felt like your heart was being examined under a microscope. The female agent spoke up. Mrs. Reed, the money transfers started a week after your wedding. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. All to accounts established in your name, with your social security number, but using addresses you've never lived at. Zariah sat down hard on one of their mismatched kitchen chairs. I don't understand. Why would someone put money in accounts I can't access? That's what we're trying to figure out, Agent Patterson said. Either your husband was hiding assets and using you as a cover, or someone else is using your identity for money laundering. Clayton rolled his chair closer, but stopped when Zariah held up her hand again. Zariah, I swear on my mother's grave, I don't know anything about those accounts. Yes, I lied about who I am. Yes, I have money, but I never put your name on anything without your permission. Your mother's grave? Zariah's voice went dangerous quiet. The mother you told me died in a car accident when you were 15? Clayton closed his eyes. She died of cancer 3 years ago. In Seattle, in a private hospital room that cost more per day than most people make in a month. Another lie. Another crack in the foundation of everything she believed about the man she'd married. The memories came flooding back. Their late-night video calls when they were dating online. Clayton sitting in what she'd thought was a tiny apartment, talking about struggling to pay bills, sharing stories about VA hospitals and disability payments that barely covered rent. She felt so sorry for him, so proud of herself for seeing past his problems to the good man underneath. But there had been moments, hadn't there? Times when he'd known things he shouldn't know. References to places he'd supposedly never been. The time he'd casually mentioned a restaurant in New York like he'd eaten there, then quickly changed the subject when she asked about it. She'd ignored those little inconsistencies because she loved him, because she wanted to believe in the fairy tale of finding someone who would love her simple, honest heart. How long were you planning to keep this up? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Clayton admitted. At first, I thought maybe a few months. Long enough to be sure. But then I fell in love with you, really in love, and I didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing you. So instead you just kept lying. Instead I kept being the man you fell in love with. The man I fell in love with doesn't exist. The words tore out her throat. He was broke and broken and honest. He was someone who understood what it meant to struggle, to go without, to choose love over money. That man was real to me, Clayton, and you just told me he was made up. The agents were taking notes, recording everything. Zariah realized her marriage was dissolving in front of strangers, becoming evidence in some investigation she didn't understand. Agent Patterson stood up. Mr. Barron, we need you to come with us now. Mrs. Reed, someone will be in contact about the accounts. Don't leave the area. As they prepared to leave, Clayton reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver key. He placed it on the table between them. Storage Unit 47 at Big Sky Storage, off Highway 2, he said quietly. Everything's in there. Documents, photos, the truth about who I really am. If you want to understand why I did this, start there. The door closed behind them, leaving Zariah alone in a cabin that suddenly felt like a stage set. Nothing was real. The man she'd loved, the life they'd built, the future she'd imagined, all of it built on lies. But as she stared at that silver key, one question burned brighter than all the others. If Clayton Barron could afford anything in the world, why had he chosen to live in poverty with her? And more importantly, what else was he hiding? Some secrets are buried 6 feet deep. Others are locked away in a 10 by 10 storage unit, waiting for the right person to find the key. Zariah drove to Big Sky Storage with shaking hands and a head full of questions that wouldn't quit. The silver key felt heavy in her pocket, like it weighed more than the lies it was supposed to unlock. Part of her wanted to throw it in the river and pretend none of this had happened. But the bigger part, the part that had been raised to face hard truths head on, knew she had to see what Clayton had been hiding. The storage facility sat on the edge of town, rows of metal doors stretching out like grave markers in a cemetery for secrets. Unit 47 was in the back row, away from the main office, tucked between two units that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. Have you ever held a key to something you weren't sure you wanted to unlock? Drop a comment if you've ever been afraid that the truth would hurt worse than the lie. The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting for this moment. The metal door rolled up with a screech that echoed across the empty lot. Zariah stepped inside and felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't a storage unit. This was a shrine to deception. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings arranged like a detective's evidence board. Photos of Clayton, the real Clayton, in boardrooms at charity galas, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. Headlines reading Tech Heir disappears, Barron Industries stock plummets. Where is Clayton Barron? But was the other wall that made Zariah's knees go weak. Pictures of her, dozens of them. Photos she'd never seen being taken, dating back months before they'd ever spoken online. Zariah leaving church. Zariah at the grocery store. Zariah sitting on her grandmother's porch, reading her Bible in the evening light. He'd been watching her, studying her, long before their first conversation on that Christian dating site. A laptop sat open on a small desk, its screen displaying what looked like a detailed file. Her file, everything about her life laid out like a business plan. Her work history, her financial struggles, her grandmother's medical bills, her complete lack of romantic experience. Even copies of her social media posts going back years, analyzed and categorized. Religious commitment, high. Financial desperation, moderate. Romantic experience, none. Likelihood of deception detection, low. The words hit her like physical blows. She wasn't his wife. She was his research project. But there was more. A thick folder labeled Phase 2 contained documents that made her stomach turn. Marriage certificates from 3 different states, all featuring Clayton Barron and 3 different women. All poor, all religious, all from small towns where nobody asked too many questions. Sarah Martinez from New Mexico, divorced after 8 months. Jennifer Walsh from North Dakota, divorced after 6 months. And now Zariah Monroe from Mississippi, currently married for 3 months and counting. The pattern was clear, clinical, and absolutely horrifying. Clayton wasn't testing love. He was collecting women like specimens, studying them, then discarding them when the experiment was over. But why? What was he trying to prove? The answer sat in a leather journal buried under the marriage certificates. Clayton's handwriting filled page after page, documenting his research into authentic human connection. The writing grew more desperate as it went on, more angry, more broken. Day 127, Sarah discovered the truth about my identity. She immediately demanded access to my accounts, threatened to go to the media if I didn't give her a settlement. Another failure, moving to Phase 2 location. Day 89, Jennifer lasted longer, but ultimately proved no different. The moment she learned about my wealth, she became someone else entirely. Greedy, manipulative, fake. Need to adjust selection criteria for next subject. Day 1, beginning Phase 3 with Zariah Monroe. Subject shows promising signs of genuine faith-based morality. Strong family values, history of self-sacrifice, no prior romantic attachments to complicate emotional responses. If this fails, may need to accept that authentic love is impossible to find. Zariah sank into the folding chair beside the desk, her legs unable to hold her weight. She wasn't just a wife. She wasn't even the first wife. She was subject number 3 in some twisted psychological experiment designed by a man who had everything but believed in nothing. The journal entries about her were even worse. Clinical observations about her behavior, her responses to his stories, her physical reactions to his touch. Their wedding night, described like a scientific procedure, complete with notes about her authentic emotional responses and genuine physical inexperience. Subject appears to genuinely love the persona I've created. 1 entry read. No indication of deception or ulterior motive. Responds positively to financial struggle. Seems to find meaning in shared hardship. beginning to believe this may be the breakthrough I've been seeking. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks ago, 3 months of marriage, and Zariah continues to exceed expectations. No requests for money, no attempts to access my real identity, no behavior changes despite opportunities to discover the truth. However, physical improvements in my condition are making the deception harder to maintain. May need to accelerate timeline for revelation. Zariah closed the journal with shaking hands. Every tender moment, every whispered confession, every time she defended him to her family, it had all been part of his sick experiment. She'd fallen in love with the character he was playing, while he'd been taking notes on her performance as the faithful wife. But there was one more folder, this one labeled Zariah, personal. Inside, she found something that stopped her heart cold. Copies of her grandmother's medical bills. All of them, dating back 2 years before they'd met. And stamped across each one in red ink, paid.
Her grandmother's cancer treatment, the experimental therapy that had given them 6 more precious months together. The medical bills that Zariah had scraped and saved to pay, working 3 jobs and selling everything she owned. Clayton had paid for all of it, anonymously, before he'd ever contacted her online. She wasn't just his wife or his research subject. She was his charity case, his pet project, the poor girl he decided to study after buying her family's gratitude with money she'd never known existed. Have you ever discovered that your entire relationship was based on lies? That someone was studying you like a lab rat while you were falling in love? Share your thoughts below. But more importantly, what would you do next if you were Zariah? As she sat in that storage unit, surrounded by evidence of her husband's betrayal, Zariah realized the cruelest truth of all. Despite everything she'd just learned, despite the lies and manipulation and clinical detachment, part of her still loved the man she'd thought Clayton Reed was. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her look up. Through the open door, she saw Clayton rolling his wheelchair across the parking lot, his face grim with determination. He'd come to explain, to manipulate, to lie some more. But this time, Zariah would be ready for him. When a man you married shows up to explain why he destroyed your life, you better hope you're stronger than you were 3 months ago. Clayton stopped his wheelchair just outside the storage unit, looking at Zariah, surrounded by the evidence of his deception. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The Montana wind whistled between the metal buildings, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of storms. "You weren't supposed to find this today," he said finally. "When was I supposed to find it?" Zariah held up the journal, her voice steadier than she felt. "After wife number 4? After you publish your research on the behavioral patterns of desperate women?" Clayton flinched like she'd slapped him. "It's not what it looks like." "Really? Because it looks like you've been collecting wives like specimens, studying us, then throwing us away when you get bored." She stood up, the chair scraping against the concrete floor. "Sarah, Jennifer, now me. How many more were there, Clayton? How many more women did you destroy before you got to me?" "2," he said quietly. "Just 2 before you. Just 2. Zariah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, well, that makes it so much better. Only 3 lives ruined instead of 4. Clayton rolled closer, and for the first time, she could see the man she'd fallen in love with fighting to surface through the stranger he'd revealed himself to be. "Zariah, please, let me explain why I did this. I read your journal. I know why you did this. You're a rich man who thinks poor women are lying about love unless you trick them into proving it. That's not." Clayton stopped, ran his hands through his hair. "Okay, maybe it started that way. But it changed with you. Everything changed with you. Have you ever had someone try to convince you that their betrayal was actually love? That breaking your trust was somehow for your own good? Comment below if you've heard this song before. Change how?" Zariah gestured at the walls covered with her photographs. "You were still watching me, still taking notes, still treating our marriage like a science experiment. Because I didn't know how to stop." The words exploded out of him. "Do you have any idea what it's like to have billions of dollars and not be able to trust a single person in your life? To have every relationship, every friendship, every conversation tainted by what you can give them instead of who you are. So you decided to lie instead. I decided to find out if real love was possible. Clayton's voice cracked. Sarah and Jennifer, they were supposed to be good women. Religious, family-oriented, struggling financially, but maintaining their dignity. Just like you. And the moment they found out who I really was, they became different people. Greedy, demanding, fake. Zariah picked up the marriage certificates, fanning them out like playing cards. So you divorced them. I had to. They weren't who I thought they were. Or maybe you weren't who they thought you were. The words came out sharper than Zariah intended. Maybe they reacted badly because they felt like idiots for falling in love with a lie. Clayton was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe you're right. But Zariah, you have to understand, by the time I realized I was really in love with you, I was in too deep. I couldn't figure out how to tell you the truth without losing you. So you just kept lying? I kept being the man you fell in love with. Zariah shook her head. No, you kept pretending to be that man. There's a difference. She held up the medical bills. You paid for my grandmother's treatment 2 years before we met. What? Clayton's face went pale. How did you? It's all here, Clayton. Every lie, every manipulation, every way you tried to control my life before I even knew you existed. She stepped closer, close enough to see the guilt written across his features. You didn't just test my love. You bought it. That's not true, isn't it? You made sure I was desperate enough, grateful enough, isolated enough to fall for your poor veteran act. You researched me like I was a business acquisition, found my pressure points, then pushed them until I had no choice but to need you. You always had a choice. Did I? Zariah's voice rose. When you were the only person who seemed to understand me. When you were the only man who didn't want to change me. When you paid my family's medical bills and then swooped in like some kind of savior. The truth hung between them, ugly and undeniable. Clayton had manufactured her circumstances, created her isolation, then positioned himself as her rescue. It was manipulation on a level so deep, so careful, that she was only now beginning to see the scope of it. I never meant for it to go this far, Clayton said. I was supposed to reveal the truth after a month. 6 weeks, maximum. But you were perfect, Zariah. Everything I'd hoped to find, but never believed existed. Kind without expecting anything in return. Loving without conditions. Real in a way I'd forgotten people could be. So you decided to keep lying to me. I decided I couldn't live without you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Part of her wanted to forgive him, to find a way back to the man she'd loved. But the bigger part, the part that had been raised to recognize right from wrong, knew better. You want to know the really sick part? Zariah said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I actually loved you. Not your money, not what you could do for me, not some fantasy about being rescued. I loved the man you pretended to be. The broken, honest, struggling man who saw me as valuable exactly as I am. Clayton reached for her hand. I am that man. Everything that mattered between us was real. Zariah stepped back, avoiding his touch. No, Clayton. That man wouldn't have lied to me for 3 months. That man wouldn't have studied me like a bug under a microscope. That man wouldn't have manipulated my entire life to prove a point about women and money. Then what do we do now? He asked, and for the first time since she'd known him, Clayton Barron looked genuinely afraid. Zariah looked around the storage unit one more time, at the evidence of his deception and her naivety, at the photographs of a life she'd thought was real and the documents proving it was all performance. Now I figure out who Zariah Barron really is. Because Zariah Reed was married to a man who doesn't exist. Just when you think your life can't get more complicated, the FBI shows up with questions that make your husband's lies look like child's play. Zariah was still sitting in the storage unit when her phone rang. Unknown number, but at this point, every call felt like another bomb waiting to explode. She almost didn't answer. Mrs. Reed? This is Agent Patterson. We need to see you immediately. There's been a development in your case. 20 minutes later, Zariah found herself back in the FBI field office in Billings, sitting across from the same agents who turned her world upside down that morning. Except now, everything looked different. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher, the gray walls more threatening, the questions more dangerous. Mrs. Reed, Agent Patterson began, "We've been investigating your husband's finances, and we've discovered something troubling. The money in those accounts isn't just being hidden, it's being moved. Transferred to offshore locations, shell companies, accounts that don't exist on paper. I already told you. I don't know anything about any money." "We believe you," the female agent said. Her name was Agent Morrison. Zariah remembered now. "But Mrs. Reed, we don't think your husband is behind this either." Zariah felt the world shift under her feet again. "What do you mean?" Agent Patterson slid a photograph across the table. It showed Clayton, the real Clayton, in what looked like a hospital room, connected to machines, bandages covering most of his face. "This was taken 6 days ago at Seattle General Hospital," Agent Patterson said. "Your husband, Clayton Barron, was in a medically induced coma following complications from his war injuries. He's been there for 2 weeks." The photograph blurred as Zariah tried to process what she was seeing. "That's impossible. Clayton was with me 6 days ago. We had dinner together. He was working on a car in the garage." "Mrs. Reed." Agent Morrison leaned forward, her voice gentle but urgent. "Who exactly did you marry 3 months ago?" The question hit Zariah like ice water. She thought about the man in the wheelchair, the gentle touches, the whispered confessions of love. The man who'd claimed to be Clayton Reed, then Clayton Barron, then something in between. "I don't understand," she whispered. Agent Patterson opened another file. "We've been tracking the real Clayton Barron for months as part of a financial fraud investigation. Someone has been using his identity, accessing his accounts, moving his money. We thought it was him, operating under assumed names, but this proves he's been unconscious in a hospital while someone else was living his life." "Living his life with me," Zariah said, the words tasting like poison. "Mrs. Reed, we need you to think carefully. Has your husband ever done anything unusual? Made phone calls at odd hours? Left for unexplained trips? Received packages or mail under different names?" Zariah's mind raced back through 3 months of marriage, looking for signs she'd missed. The late-night phone calls he'd claimed were VA appointments. The time she'd wake up and find him gone, only to have him return with explanations about insomnia and midnight drives. The way he always seemed to know things about places he'd never been, people he'd never met. "There was a package last week," she said slowly, "addressed to someone named Marcus Reed. When I asked about it, he said it was a mistake, that the Postal Service mixed up our mail all the time." The agents exchanged glances. Agent Morrison made a note. "What was in the package?" "I don't know. He took it and said he'd return it to the post office, but I never saw him do it." "Mrs. Reed, we're going to need you to help us. If this man isn't Clayton Barron, then he's someone who's been impersonating him for months, possibly years. He has access to billions of dollars, and he's been using your marriage as cover for financial crimes." The room felt like it was spinning. The man she'd married, made love to, trusted with her heart. He wasn't just a liar. He was a criminal using her as an alibi. Have you ever realized that your entire life was someone else's crime? That you were an unwitting accomplice to something you can't even understand? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is about to get even crazier. "What do you need me to do?" Zariah asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "We need you to go home and act normal," Agent Patterson said. "When he returns, don't let on that you know anything. We'll be monitoring your house, your phone calls, everything. If he's part of a larger operation, we need to identify his associates before we move. You want me to go home and pretend I'm still married to someone whose real name I don't even know? We want you to help us catch whoever is stealing millions of dollars using your husband's identity," Agent Morrison said. "Mrs. Reed, this man has been lying to you about everything. His name, his past, his injuries, his wealth. The only thing that might be real is his feelings for you, and even that could be part of his cover." Zariah thought about the storage unit, the photographs, the clinical notes about her behavior. "What if he doesn't have feelings for me? What if this is all just business?" "Then you're in more danger than we thought," Agent Patterson said quietly. "Because people who commit fraud at this level don't usually leave witnesses." The weight of it hit her all at once. She wasn't just a betrayed wife. She was evidence. A loose end. Someone who could identify a man the FBI had been hunting for months. Will you help us? Agent Morrison asked. Zariah thought about the man who'd held her on their wedding night, who'd made her laugh during her grandmother's funeral, who'd promised to love her exactly as she was. None of it had been real, but her feelings had been real. Her trust had been real. Her love had been real. And now they wanted her to use that love as bait to catch a criminal. What happens to me when this is over? She asked. That depends on what we find, Agent Patterson said, and what your husband's real plans are. As Zariah drove home to the cabin she'd shared with a stranger, one thought kept running through her mind. She'd been so worried about Clayton testing her love that she'd never considered the possibility that she was the one being tested. And she was about to find out if she'd pass or fail. Coming home to a man whose real name you don't know feels different when you realize he might be planning to kill you. Zariah pulled into their driveway and sat in her car for a full minute, staring at the cabin that no longer felt like home. The porch light was on, casting a warm yellow glow that used to mean safety. Now it felt like a trap. Through the kitchen window, she could see him moving around, probably making dinner like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't spent the day being questioned by the FBI while she discovered that her entire marriage was a lie built on someone else's stolen identity. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We're watching. Act normal. You're safe. Safe. What a joke. She was married to a criminal who'd been using a comatose man's identity to steal millions. She was bait in an FBI operation. She was alone with a stranger who might kill her if he realized she knew the truth. But she had to go inside. She had to pretend everything was normal. She had to look into his eyes and act like she still believed he was the man she'd fallen in love with. Have you ever had to smile at someone while knowing they were lying to your face? Have you ever had to act normal when everything inside you was screaming? Comment below if you've ever felt like you were acting in a play where everyone else knew the script but you. The front door opened before she could reach for the handle. There he was, the man she'd called husband for 3 months, smiling at her with the same gentle expression that had made her fall in love. Except now she could see what she'd missed before, the calculation behind his eyes, the way he watched her reactions, the performance of it all. Hey, baby, he said, reaching for her hand. How was your day? The casual endearment made her skin crawl, but she forced herself to squeeze his fingers. Fine. Busy. How about you? Quiet day. Fixed the Morrison's truck, made some calls about that job in Bozeman. He wheeled backward to let her pass, and she noticed how smoothly he moved, how strong his arms looked. Had he always been this coordinated, this capable? The smell of dinner hit her as she walked into the kitchen. Spaghetti and garlic bread, her favorite meal. The same meal he'd made for their 1-month anniversary, when she felt so grateful to have someone who cared enough to remember what she liked. Now it felt like manipulation. Another data point in his research on how to keep Zariah Monroe happy and unsuspecting. Smells good, she said, hanging her purse on the chair. Inside that purse was a recording device Agent Morrison had given her, activated by a button disguised as a lipstick tube. Everything they said would be monitored, analyzed, used as evidence. Thought you might be hungry. He served her a plate, the portions careful and precise. You seemed upset this morning. Want to talk about it? This was her chance. The FBI wanted her to fish for information to get him talking about his real identity, his associates, his plans. But looking at him across their small kitchen table, Zariah realized she wanted answers to different questions. Can I ask you something? She said, twirling spaghetti around her fork. Of course. When you look at me, what do you see? The question seemed to surprise him. He set down his fork, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. What do you mean? I mean, when you decided to marry me, what did you think you were getting? A wife? A cover story? A convenient alibi? His eyes narrowed slightly. Zariah, what brought this on? I've just been thinking about us, about how we met, how fast everything happened. Sometimes I wonder if you settled for me because I was easy. It wasn't entirely a lie. Even before today's revelations, she'd sometimes wondered why someone like Clayton, even the broken, poor version she'd thought he was, had chosen her. Small-town girl, no college education, No experience with men or the world beyond Meridian, Mississippi. Easy. He reached across the table for her hand, his touch still sending unwanted warmth up her arm. Zariah, you're the strongest woman I've ever met. Nothing about you is easy. But I was convenient, wasn't I? Religious enough to marry quickly, poor enough to not ask questions, isolated enough to not have people digging into your background. The words hung in the air between them. She watched his face carefully, looking for tells, for reactions, for any sign that he knew she was fishing. "Where is this coming from?" he asked, his voice still gentle, but with an edge she'd never heard before. "I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the store today." Zariah lied smoothly. "She asked me about your family, where you're from originally, whether your people might visit for Christmas." I realized I couldn't answer any of her questions. "You know about my family. My parents died. I don't have siblings, Dash. But where, Clayton? Where did they die? Where are they buried? What are their names?" She leaned forward, pressing her advantage. 3 months married, and I don't know your mother's maiden name, your father's profession, the town where you grew up. Don't you think that's strange?" For a moment, something shifted in his expression. The mask slipped, just slightly, and she saw something cold and calculating underneath. Then it was gone, replaced by hurt and confusion. "I don't talk about my past because it's painful," he said. "You know. But married couples share painful things. That's what marriage means, being trusted with each other's worst moments, hardest memories. Like you shared all your worst moments with me?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've never told me about the boy from high school who broke your heart. You've never explained why you flinch sometimes when I touch your back. You've never talked about why you cry in your sleep sometimes, or why you won't eat strawberry ice cream, or why you donated all your grandmother's clothes the day after the funeral instead of keeping something." Each observation hit like a small slap. He'd been watching her, cataloging her reactions, noting details she hadn't even realized she was revealing. The clinical precision of it made her feel exposed, studied, reduced to behavioral patterns and emotional triggers. "That's different," she said weakly. "Is it?" He leaned back in his wheelchair, and for the first time, she noticed he didn't wince when he moved. No pain medication on the counter, no careful positioning to avoid discomfort. "Maybe we both have secrets, Zariah. Maybe that's what marriage is, two people slowly revealing themselves to each other. Or maybe it's two people lying to each other until one of them gets tired of pretending." The words came out harsher than she'd intended. He stared at her for a long moment, and she realized she might have pushed too hard, revealed too much of what she knew. "Are you tired of pretending?" he asked quietly. The question felt loaded with meaning she couldn't decode. Was he asking about her performance as a happy wife? About his performance as Clayton Reed? About both of them pretending their marriage was real? "Are you?" she countered. He smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I stopped pretending the day I married you, Zariah. Everything since then has been completely real." As he wheeled away from the table to start washing dishes, Zariah realized something that chilled her to the bone. He might actually believe what he just said. In his mind, the lies might have stopped being lies the moment she said, "I do," which meant he had no idea she knew the truth. And that made her more dangerous to him than either of them had realized. The most dangerous time in a marriage built on lies is the moment you start telling the truth. Zariah lay in bed that night, listening to the man beside her breathe. For 3 months, that sound had been her lullaby, the rhythm that told her she wasn't alone in the world anymore. Now it felt like sleeping next to a coiled snake, waiting to see if it would strike. He'd been different at dinner, more watchful, more careful with his words. She'd pushed too hard with her questions, revealed too much suspicion. Now she was trapped in the terrible space between knowing too much and not knowing enough. At 2 a.m., he got up. She kept her breathing steady, her body relaxed, as she listened to him move around the cabin. The soft whir of his wheelchair, then footsteps. Actual footsteps. He was walking, moving with the confidence of someone who'd never needed that chair at all. The sound of the front door opening and closing made her heart race. Through the bedroom window, she watched him walk, not will walk to the garage. A few minutes later, she heard the motorcycle start up. Motorcycle? They didn't own a motorcycle. She waited until the sound faded completely, then grabbed her phone and texted the number Agent Morrison had given her. He left. Walking, not wheelchair. Motorcycle from garage. Following, the response came immediately. Stay put. We have eyes on him. Do not leave the house. But Zariah was already getting dressed. She'd spent 3 months being the obedient wife, trusting and passive and grateful for whatever scraps of truth he threw her way. That version of herself had gotten her here, married to a criminal, used as cover for fraud, potentially marked for death. Time to find out who Zariah Barron really was when she stopped being afraid. The garage told a story she'd never seen before. Behind the workbench, hidden under a tarp, was the motorcycle, a sleek black Ducati that probably cost more than she'd made in 2 years. Next to it, a toolbox that looked new, expensive, professional. But it was the false wall she found that made her hands shake. The panel slid aside to reveal a space she'd never known existed. Computer equipment, monitors, hard drives, and stacks of cash bound with rubber bands. Dozens of cell phones in charging stations. Passports with different names, but the same face, the face of the man she'd married. Marcus Reed, David Clayton, Michael Barron, Clayton David. A dozen variations on the same identity, each with complete documentation, credit cards, bank statements. Have you ever discovered that the person you loved most was someone you'd never actually met? That your entire relationship was with a ghost? Share your thoughts below, because what Zariah finds next will change everything. One of the computers was still on, displaying what looked like a banking interface. Multiple accounts, all with astronomical balances. But these weren't just stolen from Clayton Barron. These were accounts under names she recognized from the news, tech CEOs, politicians, celebrities. Her husband wasn't just impersonating one wealthy man. He was stealing from dozens of them. A notification popped up on the screen. Transfer complete. $2.3 million moved to Cayman account 7749B. The timestamp showed it had happened 10 minutes ago. While she was lying in bed, pretending to sleep, he'd been moving millions of dollars stolen from people she'd seen on television. A sound from outside made her freeze. The motorcycle returning. She quickly photographed everything she could with her phone, then closed the hidden panel and got back to the house. She was in bed, heart pounding, when she heard him come in. The wheelchair again, the careful performance of disability resumed. He moved around the cabin for a few minutes, then came back to bed. You awake? He whispered. She kept her voice sleepy, relaxed. He slid into bed beside her, and she had to force herself not to recoil when he pulled her close. His body was warm, familiar, the same arms that had held her on their wedding night. But now she knew what those hands had been doing while she slept. Bad dream. He murmured against her hair. Couldn't sleep. What did you dream about? A pause. Losing you. The words sent ice through her veins. Was that a confession? A threat? A warning about what he'd do if she discovered too much? I'm right here, she whispered, because it was what he expected to hear. I know. But sometimes I wake up and think this is all too good to be true. That someone like you couldn't really love someone like me. Someone like you. If only he knew what she'd learned about someone like him. Why wouldn't I love you? She asked, fishing for more information. Because I'm... He stopped, seemed to reconsider what he was about to say. Because I'm broken. Because I can't give you the life you deserve. What kind of life do I deserve? Another pause, longer this time. Everything. You deserve everything, Zariah. A house instead of cabin. Travel instead of staying in one place. Security instead of wondering if we'll make rent. Those things don't matter to me. I know. That's what makes you perfect. Perfect. The word made her skin crawl. She wasn't perfect. She was convenient. She was the ideal mark for whatever game he was playing. Clayton, she said softly. Yeah. If you could give me anything in the world, what would it be? She felt him smile against her shoulder. Time. I give you all the time in the world. Time to figure out who you are when you're not taking care of everyone else. Time to see places, try things, become whoever you want to be. And what would you want to return? Nothing, he said immediately. I'd want nothing in return except the chance to watch you become everything you're meant to be. The answer was so beautiful, so perfect, that for a moment she almost forgot It was coming from a man who'd stolen someone else's identity to marry her. Almost forgot that he was a criminal using her as cover while he robbed some of the most powerful people in the world. Almost. Go to sleep, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. But as she lay there in his arms, listening to his breathing slow into sleep, Zariah knew that one of them was lying. Either he was planning to disappear once his crime was complete, or she was planning to disappear before he could hurt her. The only question was who would run first, and whether the other would follow. Some conversations happen at 3 a.m. because that's when the truth can't hide anymore. The phone rang at exactly 3:17 a.m., jolting Zariah from the restless sleep she'd finally managed to find. Beside her, the man she'd married didn't stir. For someone who claimed to have nightmares, he slept remarkably peacefully for a criminal. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer anyway. Zariah? The voice was weak, hoarse, but unmistakably familiar. Her blood turned to ice. Who is this? It's Clayton, the real Clayton. I need your help. She sat up so fast the room spun. Beside her, her husband shifted but didn't wake. She slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom, closing the door as quietly as possible. That's impossible, she whispered into the phone. You're right here. You're sleeping next to me. A sound that might have been laughter if it wasn't so painful. No, I'm in a hospital room in Seattle, and I just woke up from a coma to find out someone's been living my life. Someone's been married to my wife. I'm not your wife. I don't even know you. You know my name. You know my story. You married someone claiming to be me, and now the FBI thinks I've been running a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme for my hospital bed. Zariah's legs gave out. She sank onto the bathroom floor, her back against the door, trying to process what she was hearing. How did you get this number? The agents investigating my case. Agent Patterson and Agent Morrison. They said you might be in danger, that whoever is pretending to be me might hurt you if he realizes you know the truth. How do I know you're really Clayton Barron? How do I know this isn't some kind of trick? There was a pause. What did he tell you about how I lost my legs? IED blast in Afghanistan. You were a Marine. I was never in Afghanistan. I lost my legs in a car accident when I was 19. Drunk driver hit me while I was walking home for college party. His voice got quieter. I've never served in the military. Never been married before. Never even had a serious relationship because most women can't handle dating someone in a wheelchair. The details were wrong. All wrong. The man she'd married had told her elaborate stories about his military service, his brothers who died beside him, the nightmares from combat. If this really was Clayton Barron, then everything, absolutely everything, her husband had told her was a lie. Have you ever realized that you don't know a single true thing about someone you love? That every story, every detail, every shared memory was completely fabricated? Comment below if you've ever felt like your entire relationship was built on quicksand. Who is he? She whispered in the phone. The man I married. If he's not you, then who is he? We don't know yet. But Zariah, he's been accessing my accounts, moving money, using my identity to commit crimes across multiple states. And according to the FBI, you're not his first wife. She already knew about Sarah and Jennifer, but hearing it confirmed by the real Clayton made her stomach turn. What happened to them? Sarah Martinez died in a car accident 6 months after their divorce. Single vehicle crash on a mountain road. Jennifer Walsh disappeared 3 months after hers. The police think she left voluntarily, but her family hasn't heard from her. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, too cold. He killed them. We don't know that for certain. But Zariah, you need to get out of there. Tonight. Right now. I can't just leave. The FBI wants me to help them catch him. The FBI wants to catch a financial criminal. But if this man has killed 2 women already, you're not dealing with someone who just steals money. You're dealing with someone who eliminates witnesses. Through the thin bathroom door, she heard movement. Her husband was awake. I have to go, she whispered. Zariah, wait. There's something else you need to know. The medical bills he paid for your grandmother, that money didn't come from my accounts. It came from Sarah Martinez's life insurance policy. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the bathroom tiles. Her grandmother's treatment, the miracle money that had bought them 6 extra months together, had been paid for with blood money, with the life insurance of the first woman this monster had killed. Zariah, a knock on the bathroom door. Her husband's voice, concerned and caring. "You okay in there, baby?" "Fine," she called out, her voice steadier than she had any right to expect. "Just feeling a little sick." She picked up the phone. Clayton was still there, waiting. "Meet me tomorrow," he whispered into the phone. "There's a coffee shop called Mountain View on Highway 2, about 20 miles from your place. 2 p.m. I'll have Agent Morrison with me, and we'll get you somewhere safe." "How do you know where I live?" "Because I own the cabin you're living in. It's one of my properties, and according to the rental agreement, I'm supposed to be living there alone." Another lie, another manipulation. Even the home she'd thought they'd chosen together was part of his elaborate deception. The knock came again, more insistent. "Zariah, you've been in there a while." "Coming," she called out. To Clayton, she whispered, "I'll be there." She hung up and flushed the toilet for cover, then opened the door to find her husband standing there in boxers and a t-shirt, his wheelchair nowhere in sight. In the dim hallway light, she could see him clearly, standing, balanced, completely mobile. "Feeling better?" he asked, reaching out to touch her forehead. His skin was warm, gentle, exactly like the man she'd fallen in love with. But now she could see what she'd missed before. The calculating way he watched her reactions, the performance in every gesture. "Much better," she lied, letting him pull her back toward the bedroom. As they settled back into bed, he wrapped his arms around her like he had every night for 3 months. But now she knew she was being held by someone who might have killed 2 women. Someone who had stolen a dead woman's insurance money to buy her family's gratitude. Someone who was capable of anything. "Clayton," she whispered into the darkness. "Yeah. Do you ever think about the future? About what happens to us?" She felt him tense slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you see us growing old together? Having kids? Building a real life?" A long pause. "Do you want those things?" It was a deflection, not an answer. "I asked you first." Another pause, even longer. "I think about the future every day, Zariah. But sometimes the future isn't what we plan. Sometimes things happen that change everything." "What kind of things?" "Things beyond our control. Things that make us choose between what we want and what we have to do." The words sent chills down her spine. Was he preparing her? Giving her subtle warning that their time together was ending? Or was he trying to determine if she suspected anything? "I love you," she said, because it was what he needed to hear. "I love you too," he replied, but his voice sounded different. Distant. Final. Like someone saying goodbye. As she lay there in the arms of a stranger, Zariah realized something that terrified her more than anything else. She was running out of time to figure out his plan. And if she was right about what happened to Sarah and Jennifer, she might not get a second chance. When you're about to meet the man whose life your husband stole, you better hope you're ready for the truth about who you really married. The next morning felt like acting in a play where everyone knew the script except her. She made coffee, scrambled eggs, chatted about the weather while her husband read emails on his phone. Normal morning, normal conversation, normal marriage. If you ignored the fact that she was planning to meet his victim in 6 hours. "I'm going into town today," she said casually, refilling his coffee cup. "Need to pick up a few things, maybe visit Mrs. Henderson." He looked up from his phone, and for just a moment, she caught something in his expression. Suspicion? Calculation? "Want me to come with you?" "No, you hate shopping. Besides, Mrs. Henderson talked your ear off about her cats." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Be careful driving. Roads are getting icy." "Always am." She kissed his cheek before leaving. The same goodbye kiss she'd given him every day for 3 months. His skin smelled like the soap they shared, felt familiar under her lips. Even now, knowing what she knew, her body responded to him the same way. That might be the cruelest part of all. Her heart hadn't caught up to her head yet. The drive to Mountain View Coffee took forever and no time at all. She parked across the street, watching through the window for several minutes before going in. Agent Morrison sat at a corner table with a man in a wheelchair, and Zariah's breath caught in her throat. He looked exactly like her husband. Same face, same build, same dark hair. But everything else was different. Where her husband moved with careful control, this man had the slightly awkward positioning of someone who'd been in a wheelchair for years. Where her husband's eyes were calculating, this man looked genuinely nervous, vulnerable. This was what Clayton Barron actually looked like. This was who she would have married if her husband hadn't stolen his identity first. Agent Morrison waved her over, and suddenly Zariah was face to face with the real victim of her marriage. Mrs. Reed. Clayton Barron's voice was exactly the same as her husband's, but softer somehow. Less performed. Thank you for coming. I know this must be incredibly confusing. She sat down across from him, studying his face for differences, for tells that would prove which Clayton was real. But the resemblance was perfect. They could have been twins. How was this possible? She asked. You look exactly like him. That's what we're trying to figure out, Agent Morrison said. Mr. Barron, tell her what you told us about your family. Clayton shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair. I have a younger brother. Had a younger brother. Marcus. We were twins, identical. He died 2 years ago in a climbing accident in Colorado. Zariah felt the world tilt. Twins. Marcus always resented me for inheriting the family business while he got a trust fund. He thought I didn't deserve the responsibility, the respect that came with being the heir. We hadn't spoken in 5 years when he died. Agent Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Reed, what did your husband tell you about his family? That he was an only child, that his parents died when he was young, that he had no siblings, no close relatives. Because Marcus Barron is supposed to be dead, Agent Morrison said. But we're starting to think he faked his death and has been living as his brother ever since. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too bright. You're telling me I married a dead man? We're telling you that you married a man who let everyone believe he was dead so he could steal his brother's identity and fortune, Clayton said quietly. Mrs. Reed, Zariah, Marcus was always jealous of what I had. Money, respect, the family business. But he was also brilliant, manipulative, and completely ruthless when he wanted something. Why me? The question came out smaller than she intended. Why did he choose me? Clayton and Agent Morrison exchanged glances. We think you were practice, Agent Morrison said gently. A way for him to perfect his impersonation of his brother. Small town, isolated community, people who wouldn't ask too many questions about inconsistencies in his story. Plus, Clayton added, his voice even gentler, you're exactly the kind of woman I always said I wanted to marry. Religious, kind, someone who would love me for who I am instead of what I have. Marcus must have heard me say that 100 times growing up. The cruelty of it hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just convenient. She was chosen specifically because she represented everything the real Clayton had ever wanted in a partner. Marcus had studied his brother's dreams and used them against both Clayton and her. Have you ever realized that someone chose you not because of who you are, but because of who you reminded them of? That you were cast in someone else's story without even knowing it? Drop a comment if you've ever felt like a replacement for someone else's dream. What happens now? She asked. Now you help us catch him, Agent Morrison said. We need evidence of the financial crimes, proof that he's been impersonating his brother, and, if possible, information about what happened to Sarah Martinez and Jennifer Walsh. You think he killed them. We think Sarah found out who he really was and became a threat. Jennifer. We're not sure about Jennifer yet. Zariah thought about the insurance money that had paid for her grandmother's treatment, about the clinical way Marcus had studied her, documented her responses, treated her love like data to be analyzed. What if he finds out I know? Clayton reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was so similar to her husband's that for a moment she felt disoriented, like she was cheating on Marcus with his own brother. Then you run, Clayton said simply. You run, and you don't look back, and you let us worry about catching him. But the FBI needs me to dash. The FBI needs you alive more than they need evidence. Agent Morrison interrupted. Mrs. Reed, if you feel unsafe for even a second, you call this number and we'll extract you immediately. She looked at Clayton, really looked at him. This was the man she might have fallen in love with if circumstances had been different. Kind eyes, genuine concern, the vulnerability that comes from real hardship rather than performed suffering. "What would you have done," she asked him, "if we'd met on that dating site instead of your brother? Would you have lied to me too?" Clayton's face went red. "No. I would have told you everything up front. About the money, the disability, all of it. I would have been terrified you'd reject me, but I wouldn't have lied, even if it meant I might not love you. Especially then. Love built on lies isn't love at all." As Zariah drove home to face the man who'd stolen both their lives, those words echoed in her head. Love built on lies isn't love at all, which meant everything she'd felt for the past 3 months, every tender moment, every whispered confession, every night of passionate intimacy had been built on nothing but smoke and mirrors. The only question now was whether she was strong enough to destroy the illusion before it destroyed her. 3 days after meeting the real Clayton Barron, Zariah sat in her grandmother's old rocking chair, staring at 2 envelopes on the kitchen table. One contained divorce papers. The other held a cashier's check for $2 million. Marcus hadn't come home since the hospital confrontation, but he'd sent both envelopes through a courier service, along with a handwritten note that made her hands shake as she read it. "You deserve better than what I gave you. Take the money. Start over. Forget Marcus Reed ever existed." Agent Rodriguez had called that morning with an update that left her feeling sick. "We found Jennifer Walsh," she'd said. "Alive, but barely. She's been held in a warehouse outside Billings for 8 months. Marcus kept her there while he lived her life. Is she okay? Physically, she'll recover. Mentally, that's going to take time. She says he told her he needed her identity for a business deal. Promised he'd let her go after 6 months. Instead, he kept moving the timeline." Zariah closed her eyes. The woman whose life Marcus had stolen was real. Had a family. Had dreams that got put on hold because a dead man decided he needed to become someone else. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "We traced the money trail deeper. Marcus didn't just steal from his brother's company. He's been running a long-term con for 3 years. Fake identities, insurance fraud, romance scams. You weren't his first wife, Zariah. You were his 4th. The words hit like a punch to the stomach. 4th. Rebecca Martinez in Arizona. Lisa Chun in Nevada. Amy Johnson in Oregon. All married to different versions of Marcus Barron. All left when he disappeared with their savings." Zariah thought about the credit cards she'd never seen statements for. The bank account he'd insisted on managing alone. The way he'd always paid for things in cash, claiming it was easier with his disability benefits. Did they know? About his real identity? None of them. And here's the thing. Each time, he told them the same story. Dead parents, war injury, living on disability. He's been perfecting this act for years. After hanging up, Zariah walked outside to the small garden she'd planted behind the cabin. The tomatoes were coming in nice, their red faces bright against the green vines. She'd worked this soil with her own hands, believing she was building something real with someone who loved her. Now she wondered if anything about their life together had been true. The physical intimacy they'd shared, was that practiced too? The way he'd held her on their wedding night, gentle and careful, making her feel like she was precious. Was that just another performance from a man who'd done it 3 times before? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I know you hate me, but I need you to know, what we had wasn't part of the plan. I never meant to fall in love with you." She stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Which you? Marcus? Clayton? Or someone else entirely?" The response came quickly. "The man who cried the night you told me about your mother. The one who held you during the storm last month. The one who's been too scared to tell you the truth because losing you would kill what's left of me." Zariah felt tears coming. Even now, even knowing what she knew, part of her heart still responded to his words. The connection they'd shared felt real. The conversations about faith, about healing, about building a life together. Those moments had meant something to her. But how could she trust any of it now? Another text. "I'm at the creek behind Miller's property. If you want answers, real ones this time, I'll be here until sunset. If not, I'll disappear and never contact you again." She knew that creek. They'd gone there on their second date, sharing a picnic lunch and talking for hours about their dreams for the future. He told her about wanting children someday, about how being with her made him feel whole again after the war. All lies. Or were they? The rational part of her mind said to stay home. Call Agent Rodriguez. Let them handle this. Marcus was dangerous, a con artist who destroyed multiple lives without blinking. But the part of her that had fallen in love with late-night phone calls and gentle kisses wanted to hear what he had to say. Wanted to understand how someone could fake love so convincingly that it felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. She looked at the 2 envelopes again. Divorce papers that would free her from a marriage built on deception. Money that could give her the fresh start she'd need to rebuild. Or she could drive to that creek and demand the truth from the man who'd made her question everything she thought she knew about love. Have you ever been so deep in love that you'd consider forgiving the unforgivable? That you'd risk everything for just the chance of understanding why someone destroyed your world? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because what Zariah decides next will determine if this story ends in redemption or revenge. Zariah drove to Miller's Creek as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. She'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on the same blue dress she'd worn on their first date. She didn't know why. Maybe because she wanted to remind them both of who they'd been before the lies took over. Marcus was sitting on the fallen log where they'd shared their first kiss. But something was different about him now. The careful posture was gone. The practiced way he positioned his wheelchair, the calculated movements she'd grown used to, all of it replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. He didn't look up when she approached, just kept throwing small stones into the water, watching the ripples spread. "You came," he said quietly. "I need to understand." She sat on the ground across from him, far enough away that he couldn't touch her, close enough that she could see his face clearly. All of it, from the beginning. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded different. Less controlled. More broken. "My name is Marcus Barron. I did serve in Afghanistan. I did lose my legs to an IED blast. Everything about the war, about the injury, that part was true. But not the rest. No." He threw another stone. "Clayton and I were twins. Identical. Born 6 minutes apart. Grew up competing over everything. Grades, girls, who could run faster, who could make Dad prouder. When we enlisted together, it was supposed to be our last competition. Who could be the better soldier?" Zariah watched his face carefully, looking for signs of manipulation, for the practiced expressions she now knew he was capable of. But what she saw looked like genuine pain. The blast that took my legs? It was meant for him. Clayton stepped on the trigger, but the force threw me backward into the explosion. He walked away with minor cuts. I spent 2 years learning to walk again with prosthetics. "So you hated him?" "I tried not to, but watching him come home to inherit everything while I fought just to use a bathroom independently. Yeah, I hated him. He got the company, the money, the perfect life. I got disability checks and phantom pain that kept me awake for months." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flask. He unscrewed the cap, but didn't drink from it, just held it like a prop. 3 years ago, I found out Clayton had been lying to our father about the company finances, skimming money, hiding profits, setting up accounts in different names. When Dad died, Clayton inherited a mess he'd created, but nobody knew it except me. "How did you find out?" "I still had access to some military records. Clayton had listed me as his emergency contact for financial matters during deployment. When I saw the discrepancies, I confronted him. The creek water moved steadily around rocks and fallen branches, the sound filling the silence between them. He offered me money to keep quiet. A lot of money. Enough to get surgeries that might give me back some of what I'd lost. But I didn't want his charity. I wanted justice. So you decided to steal his identity. I decided to take what should have been mine from the beginning." His voice hardened. "The blast that destroyed my legs? It happened because Clayton was showing off, trying to impress some reporter who was embedded with our unit. He took a shortcut through a known minefield because he wanted to be the hero of her story." Zariah felt a chill. "He caused your injury. He caused everything that came after. My pain, my struggles, my isolation. While he built an empire on lies, I lived in a cabin in the woods, popping pills just to make it through each day. That doesn't justify what you did to me, to those other women." Marcus finally looked at her directly. No, it doesn't. The other women, they were part of the plan. Ways to move money, create alibis, establish credibility for my new identities. I told myself they were just necessary casualties. And me? You were supposed to be the same. A small-town girl who'd believed the war veteran story, who'd helped me establish Marcus Reed as a real person. Someone I could use for 6 months and then discard when I was ready to disappear with Clayton's money. Zariah's chest tightened. Hearing him confirm her worst fears out loud felt like being cut open. But then you sent me that first message about your mother. About how she fought cancer with such grace, and how you'd learned from her that love wasn't about what people could give you, but about how they made you feel when they had nothing left to offer. He took a shaky breath. That night, after we talked for 4 hours about faith and loss and hope, I realized I'd never had a real conversation with another person in my entire life. Not even before the war. I'd spent so long competing, performing, try to win that I'd never just connected with someone. So, you decided to keep lying to me? I decided to become the man you deserved. The man you thought I was. For the first time in my life, I wanted to be better than I actually was. The sun was touching the horizon now, casting everything in golden light. Zariah could see tears on Marcus's face, and despite everything, her heart responded to his pain. The night we got married, he continued, when you told me you loved me exactly as I was, broken parts and all, I knew I was in trouble. Because for the first time, someone loved me without knowing who I really was. And I wanted to deserve that love more than I'd ever wanted anything. Zariah stood up slowly. The conversation she'd been dreading was almost over, but she still didn't have the answer to the question that mattered most. Do you love me, Marcus? The real me, not some idea of me that fits your plan? He looked up at her with eyes full of something that looked like honesty. I love you so much it's destroying me. That's why I sent the divorce papers. That's why I'm willing to disappear forever if that's what you need. And if I said I wanted you to stay, to try to build something real this time. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a recording equipment. I've been wearing a wire for the FBI since yesterday, he said quietly. Agent Rodriguez offered me a deal. Full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. Everything I just told you is being recorded. Zariah felt the world tilt. You're still lying to me. No, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I'm finally telling you the truth. All of it. Even the parts that guarantee I'll lose you forever. In the distance, she could hear the sound of approaching vehicles. The confession was over, and her husband, whoever he really was, had just turned himself in. But as the FBI cars came into view, Marcus said one last thing that would haunt her for months to come. The man who loves you is real, Zariah. Even if everything else was fake. 6 months later, Zariah sat in the front row of a federal courthouse in Billings, watching the man she'd married testify against himself. Marcus wore an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look pale, but his eyes were clearer than she'd seen them since their wedding day. The prosecution had built their case methodically. Financial records, witness testimony, evidence of multiple identities spanning 3 states. The defense attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s, argued that Marcus Barron was a victim of his own trauma, driven to desperate acts by years of untreated PTSD and survivor's guilt. Zariah had been called as a witness for both sides. Mrs. Monroe, the prosecutor began, using her maiden name since the marriage had been declared invalid. Can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant? She'd rehearsed this moment for weeks, but sitting there with Marcus watching her, every prepared word disappeared. I loved him, she said quietly. I love the man I thought he was. And I think part of that man was real. Even though he defrauded you, lied to you from the moment you met. Zariah glanced at Marcus. He was looking down at his hands, shoulders tense with what looked like shame. The conversations we had late at night about faith and healing, those felt genuine. The way he held me when I cried about my mother, that tenderness wasn't fake. The man who planted a garden with me behind our cabin, who read me Bible verses when I couldn't sleep, I don't think that was part of any con. The prosecutor pressed harder. But knowing what you know now about his other victims, his pattern of deception, do you still believe any of his feelings for you were authentic? This was the question that had kept her awake for months. The question that made her drive to the courthouse every day of the trial, searching Marcus's face for answers she might never find. "I think he became the man I fell in love with," she said finally. "I don't think he started out that way. But somewhere between the lies and the pretending, he discovered parts of himself he didn't know existed." The question isn't whether his love was real. The question is whether real love can grow from fake foundations. During the lunch break, Agent Rodriguez approached her in the hallway. "How are you holding up?" Zariah managed a weak smile. "Some days are better than others." "How's Jennifer Walsh doing?" "She's getting stronger. Started a support group for fraud victims. She actually wants to meet you if you're interested." The idea of meeting another woman Marcus had deceived should have felt awful. Instead, Zariah felt curious. What does she want to talk about? Closure mostly, but also, she said something interesting last week. She thinks Marcus genuinely cared about her too, toward the end. Different from what he felt for you, but real in its own way. That afternoon, the defense called Marcus to testify on his own behalf. His attorney had advised against it, but Marcus insisted he wanted to face the consequences of his choices directly. "Mr. Barron," his lawyer began, "can you explain to the court what drove you to create these false identities?" Marcus looked directly at the jury as he spoke. "I was angry. Angry at my brother, angry at God, angry at a world that seemed to reward people for taking shortcuts while I struggled with pain every single day. I wanted to make someone pay for what happened to me." And when did that anger change? The night Zariah told me about her mother's last words. Her mother said that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing to see the good in someone even when they can't see it themselves. Marcus turned slightly to look at Zariah. I realized that's what she was doing with me. She was loving the best version of. Because I was a coward, I knew that telling her the truth would mean losing the only person who'd ever loved me for who I could be, not who I'd been or what I could provide. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal. She detailed every crime, every lie, every dollar stolen. She made Marcus recount the pain he'd caused each victim, the marriages he'd destroyed, the trust he'd shattered. "And what about Rebecca Martinez?" she demanded. "The woman who sold her car to pay for your supposed medical treatments? Did you love her too?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I cared about her, but I didn't love her. With Rebecca, Lisa, and Amy, I could maintain the distance I needed to use them. I told myself they were getting something out of the relationship too, companionship, security, someone who made them feel special. But not with Mrs. Monroe. No, with Zariah, I couldn't maintain that distance. She broke down every wall I'd built, made me want to be honest for the first time in years. That's why I had to wire myself for the FBI, because loving her meant I couldn't keep lying to her. So your confession was just another manipulation." Marcus looked directly at Zariah when he answered. "My confession was the first completely honest thing I'd done in 3 years. I knew it would destroy any chance I had with her, but I couldn't build a life with someone I loved on the foundation of everything I'd done to people I'd used." That evening, Zariah sat in her hotel room, staring at a letter that had been delivered to her door. Her name was written on the envelope in Marcus's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a bank account number and password. "Every dollar I took is in this account," the note read. "I want Rebecca, Lisa, Amy, and Jennifer to get back what I stole from them. The rest belongs to you. Not because you're entitled to it, but because you're the only person who helped me remember what it felt like to want to be better than I actually was. Use it to build the life you deserve, with someone who can love you honestly from the beginning. You taught me that love isn't about testing someone's faith in you. It's about having enough faith in yourself to be worthy of their love. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn that lesson, and I'm sorry I had to break your heart in the process." As closing arguments began the next day, Zariah realized she'd made a decision that surprised even her. She wasn't staying for the verdict. Some stories don't end with justice or revenge or even forgiveness. Sometimes they end with understanding, the recognition that people can be completely wrong and partially right at the same time, that love can be real even when everything else is fake, and that moving forward doesn't always mean choosing sides. Marcus had given her the tools to rebuild. Whether he deserved punishment or redemption wasn't her decision to make. But whether she deserved a fresh start, that was a question only she could answer. 1 year after the trial ended, Zariah stood in the kitchen of a small house in Nashville, Tennessee, watching steam rise from her coffee cup. Through the window, she could see the garden she'd planted in the backyard, tomatoes, peppers, and herbs growing strong in soil she'd prepared with her own hands. Marcus had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. She'd heard about the verdict through Agent Rodriguez, who'd called to tell her that all the stolen money had been returned to his victims. Rebecca Martinez had sent her a thank you card. Jennifer Walsh had invited her to speak at a support group meeting. Lisa Chun and Amy Johnson had both moved on with their lives, declining any further contact. Zariah respected their choices. Everyone processed betrayal differently. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother's old pastor in Mississippi. "How you doing, child? Still thinking about you up there in Nashville." She smiled as she typed back, "Building something new, taking it one day at a time." The house wasn't much, a 2-bedroom rental in a quiet neighborhood, but it was hers. She'd used part of the return money for a down payment and put the rest in a trust fund for women leaving abusive relationships. The local women's shelter had helped her set it up, no questions asked. Her new job at a nonprofit counseling center paid enough to cover her bills and gave her purpose. Helping other people work through trauma and betrayal had taught her things about healing she'd never learned in church or through her grandmother's wisdom. Sometimes the path back to wholeness led through anger, doubt, and forgiveness that took years to develop. The doorbell rang, interrupting her morning routine. On her porch stood a woman about her age with short brown hair and tired eyes. "Are you Zariah Monroe?" "Yes. My name is Catherine Ross. I think I might be married to your husband." Zariah's coffee cup nearly slipped from her hands. "What?" "I got your address from the Victim Services Coordinator in Montana. She said you might be willing to talk to me." Catherine pulled out a photograph that made Zariah's breath catch. Marcus, but with longer hair and no wheelchair, standing next to Catherine in what looked like a courthouse. "We got married 3 months ago in Colorado." He said his name was Michael Reed, that he was a veteran dealing with PTSD from losing friends overseas. "He seemed so sweet, so broken. I thought I could help him heal." Zariah stepped back to let Catherine inside. "What did you find out?" Credit card statements started showing charges from places he'd never mentioned. When I confronted him, he disappeared. Left behind a suitcase full of fake IDs and a letter saying he was sorry, but he couldn't be the man I deserved. They sat at Zariah's kitchen table while Catherine told her story. The details were different. Michael Reed wasn't disabled, claimed to be from Oregon instead of Montana, said his parents had died in a car accident rather than from illness. But the pattern was familiar. The late-night conversations about healing, the quick marriage, the careful management of finances, the growing sense that something important was being hidden. "The thing is," Catherine said, voice breaking, "I think he really did love me. The way he looked at me, the way he held me when I had nightmares about my ex-boyfriend, that felt real." Zariah reached across the table to squeeze Catherine's hand. "It probably was real. That's what makes this so hard to process. How do you move past something like this? How do you trust your own judgment again?" These were questions Zariah had wrestled with for months in therapy, in late-night conversations with her counselor, in long walks through Nashville's quiet neighborhoods. "You start small," she said. "You trust yourself to make good decisions about little things. What to have for breakfast, which route to take to work, whether to adopt a plant or a pet. You build back up to trusting your judgment about people slowly." "Do you think he's done this to others? Besides us and the women from the trial?" Zariah had wondered the same thing. "I don't know, but I think he's running out of ways to reinvent himself. The FBI is watching for new identities associated with his fingerprints and DNA. At some point, he'll have to face who he actually is." Catherine stayed for 2 hours. They shared coffee, stories, and phone numbers. Before leaving, she asked the question Zariah had been expecting. "Do you hate him?" Zariah considered her answer carefully. "Some days. Other days I feel sorry for him. Most days I just feel grateful that knowing him taught me the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in someone." "What's the difference?" When you love someone, you want them to become the best version of themselves. When you lose yourself in someone, you want them to become the version of themselves that makes you feel complete. Marcus needed women who would lose themselves in him because he was too afraid to figure out who he actually was. After Catherine left, Zariah walked through her small house, touching familiar objects that belonged only to her. Books she'd chosen, furniture she'd picked out, pictures on the walls that told the story of a life she was building deliberately, honestly, one choice at a time. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was from Montana. For a moment, she hesitated. It could be anyone, another victim, a reporter, someone selling insurance. Or it could be Marcus, calling from prison with another apology or explanation she didn't need to hear. She let it go to voicemail. Whatever message was waiting for her could wait a little longer. She had a garden to tend, a life to build, and a future to create that belonged entirely to her. Some stories end with reunion. Some end with revenge. This one was ending with something more powerful than either, the choice to begin again. The voicemail was from a correctional facility in Montana. Marcus had been granted permission to make one supervised phone call to her, and he'd asked the prison chaplain to reach out on his behalf. Zariah deleted the message without listening to it completely. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived with her name written in familiar handwriting. She almost threw it away unopened, but something made her pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need for closure she hadn't realized she still wanted. The envelope contained 3 pages of notebook paper covered in Marcus's careful script. Dear Zariah, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to respond. But my counselor here says that making amends requires complete honesty, especially when, that honesty serves no purpose except acknowledging the truth. I've been in federal prison for 14 months now. Most days I work in the library, helping other inmates prepare for their GEDs. On Wednesdays, I attend a group for people who've committed crimes while struggling with mental health issues. On Sundays, I go to chapel, not because I've found religion, but because sitting in those folding chairs reminds me of your grandmother's church. It reminds me of the first time I felt like someone believed I could be better than my worst impulses. 3 months ago, I learned that my brother Clayton died in a car accident in Seattle. He was alone when it happened, coming home from a business dinner where he'd been drinking too much and taking risks he didn't need to take. The irony isn't lost on me that he died the same way he lived, carelessly, assuming he was invincible. I inherited his estate, all of it. The lawyers say it's worth close to $40 million after taxes and debts. I'm signing it all over to a foundation that helps veterans with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. I thought you should know that the money you helped me steal is going toward preventing other people from making the choices I made. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you, to all of you. My therapist asked me to write letters to each woman I deceived, not to send them, but to process the specific ways I violated each relationship. Writing your letter took me 6 hours because I kept having to stop and acknowledge how many different ways I lied to you. I lied about my name, my past, my disability, my finances. But the biggest lie was letting you believe that your love could fix me. You spent months trying to be patient with someone you thought was healing from trauma, when what you were actually doing was enabling someone who was choosing to stay broken because it was easier than facing the truth. The man you fell in love with, Marcus Reed, he was real in the sense that he represented who I wanted to become. But he wasn't real in any way that mattered. He was a character I created because I was too afraid to find out if anyone could love Marcus Barron, the angry, bitter, jealous man who blamed everyone else for his problems. Here's what I've learned in therapy. I didn't con you because I was damaged by war. I conned you because I was too proud to do the work of healing honestly. It was easier to create a new identity than to fix the broken one I'd been living with. The other women I married were practice runs, ways to perfect the performance. But you weren't practice. You were the real test. Could I create an identity so convincing that someone would love me unconditionally? Could I be worthy of the kind of love I'd never believed I deserved? The answer was yes. You love Marcus Reed completely. But Marcus Reed was a lie, which meant your love was built on nothing solid. I took your faith and used it as evidence that I was capable of change, when what I should have done was change first, and then find someone who could love the person I'd actually become. I heard through the prison grapevine that you spoke at Jennifer Walsh's support group. She wrote me a letter, not a kind one, but a fair one, saying that you help her understand the difference between forgiving someone and accepting responsibility for their healing. She said you told the group that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not a gift you give to the person who hurt you. I hope that's true. I hope you've forgiven me not because I deserve it, but because carrying anger toward me would poison the life you're building now. I also heard that Catherine Ross contacted you. Yes, I married her. Yes, I was planning to run the same con again, but I couldn't go through with it. 3 weeks into the marriage, I realized I was trying to recreate what we'd had, and that was impossible. You can't manufacture authentic connection. You can't fake your way into the kind of love that changes you. So I left her a letter and disappeared. Not because I wanted to protect her from the truth, but because I finally understood that what I'd been calling love was actually dependency. I needed women to believe in me because I refused to do the hard work of believing in myself. I'm getting out in 6 years if I maintain good behavior. When that day comes, I won't try to contact you. I won't show up in Nashville or wherever you're living then. I won't ask for forgiveness or try to explain myself further. I'll disappear completely from your life, the way I should have done 2 years ago when I first realized I was falling in love with you. But I want you to know that loving you, really loving you, not needing you or using you or testing you, taught me that I'm capable of wanting someone else's happiness more than my own comfort. That realization came too late to save our marriage, but it's not too late to save the rest of my life. I hope you're building something beautiful, Zariah. I hope you're surrounded by people who love you honestly, who earn your trust instead of demanding it, who see your strength instead of trying to complete themselves through your faith. You deserve better than what I gave you. But more importantly, you knew you deserved better, and that knowledge saved you from staying in something that would have destroyed us both eventually. Thank you for loving the best parts of me into existence. I'm sorry it took losing you to teach me that those parts were worth developing. Marcus. 3 years after reading Marcus's letter, Zariah stood at the edge of Sunset Creek in Tennessee, wearing her grandmother's pearl necklace and a simple white dress she'd chosen herself. This time, there were no borrowed folding chairs or wilted flowers. This time, everything was exactly as it should be. The man waiting for her at the makeshift altar wasn't broken or hiding secrets or testing her faith. David Chun was a social worker she'd met at the counseling center, a quiet man with gentle hands and honest eyes who'd spent their first 3 months of dating convincing her that not every man who seemed too good to be true was hiding something terrible. Their courtship had been slow, careful, built on small moments of trust that accumulated like interest in a savings account. David knew about Marcus from their second date. Not because Zariah felt obligated to confess her past, but because she'd learned that real love requires real honesty from the beginning. So your ex-husband was a con artist who used multiple identities to steal money from women he married? David had asked over coffee, his expression more curious than judgmental. That's the simple version, yes. And you're worried I might be doing the same thing? Zariah had laughed despite herself. Are you? Well, let's see. My real name is David Chun. I'm 31 years old. I work at Nashville Family Services making $43,000 a year. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with a cat named Biscuit, and my most scandalous secret is that I sometimes eat cereal for dinner because I hate cooking for one person. That's either very honest or a very elaborate cover story. Feel free to investigate. Talk to my coworkers, my landlord, my mother. She'll be happy to tell you about every embarrassing thing I did between ages 5 and 25. The thing that convinced Zariah that David was genuine wasn't his willingness to be investigated. It was the way he reacted when she told him she needed to take things slowly, that she'd been burned before and needed time to learn to trust her own judgment again. That makes complete sense, he'd said. Trust should be earned, not demanded. I'm willing to earn yours for as long as it takes. Most men would have seen her caution as a challenge to overcome or a barrier to push through. David treated it as valuable information about how to love her well. Their relationship had grown steadily, built on shared work at the counseling center, long conversations about faith and healing, and David's patient understanding that some days Zariah still woke up expecting to discover that happiness was just another elaborate deception. "You know what I love most about you?" he'd asked one evening as they worked side by side in her garden. "What?" "You're not trying to save me. You're not looking for someone to fix or heal or convince to be better. You just want someone to build a life with." That was the moment Zariah knew she was ready to marry again. Not because she'd forgotten the pain Marcus had caused, but because she'd learned the difference between healing from betrayal and letting betrayal define her future. Now, as David smiled at her across the small gathering of friends and family, Zariah felt something she'd never experienced on her first wedding day. Complete certainty that the man she was marrying was exactly who he claimed to be. The ceremony was simple. No elaborate vows about testing love or proving devotion. Just promises to be honest, to be kind, to choose each other repeatedly through whatever challenges life might bring. During the reception, Jennifer Walsh approached Zariah with a gentle smile. She'd become a friend over the past 2 years, bonding over their shared experience and their mutual commitment to helping other women avoid similar situations. "How does it feel?" Jennifer asked. "Different," Zariah said. "Better. Real. I'm happy for you. You deserve this." They stood together watching David dance with his elderly mother, laughing at something she'd whispered in his ear. "Do you ever wonder what happened to him?" Jennifer asked quietly. "To Marcus?" Sometimes. Zariah had received one more letter from the prison 2 years ago, informing her that Marcus had been released early for good behavior and had relocated to a halfway house in Oreg. Do you think he ever really changed? This was a question Zariah had discussed extensively in therapy, in late-night conversations with David, in quiet moments when she was trying to make peace with her past. "I think he learned things about himself that he needed to learn," she said finally. "Whether that translates to real change, that's not my concern anymore. My job isn't to monitor his growth or validate his transformation. My job is to build a life with someone who was already whole when I met him." As the evening wound down, Zariah found herself standing alone at the edge of the creek, listening to the water move over rocks and fallen branches. The sound reminded her of Miller's Creek in Montana, where she'd sat across from Marcus and tried to untangle truth from lies. David appeared beside her, offering her his jacket as the temperature dropped. "Regrets?" he asked gently. "About us?" "Never. About him." Zariah considered the question honestly. "I regret that it took betrayal to teach me what real love should look like. But I don't regret learning the lesson." "What's the lesson?" "That love isn't about faith or trust or believing in someone's potential. Love is about choosing someone whose actions consistently match their words, whose kindness doesn't depend on your ability to heal them, whose honesty doesn't require your investigation." David nodded. "Someone who loves you for who you are, not who you could become. Someone who's already becoming the person they want to be, with or without you in their life." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars reflect on the moving water. Somewhere in Oregon, Marcus Barron might be starting over again, trying to build an honest life with the tools he'd learned in prison. Zariah hoped that was true, not because she forgave him, but because everyone deserved the chance to become better than their worst choices. But his journey was no longer her responsibility. Her responsibility was to this man beside her, to the marriage they were beginning, to the life they would build together on foundations of truth instead of need. As they walked back toward the lights and laughter of their wedding reception, Zariah felt something she'd been afraid to hope for during those dark months after Marcus's arrest. Complete, uncomplicated happiness. Not happiness that required her to forget the past or pretend the pain hadn't been real. Happiness that acknowledged everything she'd survived and celebrated everything she'd learned. The kind of happiness that grows from choosing to trust yourself, from building slowly and carefully, from loving someone who loves you back without conditions or tests or hidden agendas. The kind of happiness that doesn't require you to save anyone else in order to feel worthy of being saved yourself. Behind them, the creek continued its ancient work of wearing down rough edges and carrying away what no longer served the landscape. Ahead of them, their friends and family waited with cake and music and blessings for a marriage that would be built on honesty from its very first day. And for the first time in her life, Zariah Monroechan knew exactly where she belonged. Love isn't about finding someone who needs you to complete them. It's about finding someone who chooses you because they want to share their already complete life with yours. If you've ever been deceived by someone you loved, remember, their lies don't invalidate your ability to recognize truth. They just taught you what authentic love actually looks like. What would you do if you discovered your marriage was built on lies? Would you stay and try to rebuild, or would you have the courage to start over? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more stories about love, betrayal, and the strength it takes to believe in happiness again. Because sometimes the greatest love story isn't about staying with the wrong person forever. It's about having enough self-respect to leave and enough hope to try again with the right one.